it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Color Kitz Collection for October. I'm using the pattern papers, the embellishments, and also the paints from this kit. I started off by using a square die. I cut out a number of squares of pattern paper, and then I also cut out lots and lots of squares from white cardstock. And I'm stacking the white cardstock two on top of each other and then finishing my little pile with a piece of pattern paper, and I use some ATG adhesive to do that. And then after I had all of my squares assembled, I used my cutter and I cut all of the squares into triangles. The reason I didn't use a triangle die is the triangle dies that I have are a little bit too high, and I wanted triangles that were kind of low and wide. I'm not really sure why, but that's what I had in my head when I was planning this layout. So I cut all of them in half to make these triangles. I know that I'm going to create a mixed media background, so right now I'm arranging the triangles on a piece of paper in order to decide where I'm going to put the mixed media in the background. I want to put it behind these shapes. I used 3 different pattern papers. Each of them has a different dominant color. There's orange, purple, and black. I thought that these were 3 great Halloween colors to use for the shapes, and then I would make my background green, and that way there would be some contrast between the pattern paper shapes and the background. So this is my idea. I wanted to have kind of a cascade of triangles. I'm arranging these triangles on a piece of 120-pound smooth white cardstock that I've already coated with some gesso. At this point, I realized I made way too many of these triangles. I guess I thought I would need a lot more than I did to cover my background. So I'm going to save the other triangles for another layout. And then this is my photo. It's a picture of some jack-o'-lanterns that my daughter and her boyfriend carved. And so I mounted that photo on a piece of white cardstock and then again on some black cardstock. And I'm going to have that photo to the left-hand side of the layout. Right now I'm using a pencil and just drawing a small triangle behind each of the triangles just to give me an idea of where I should put the mixed media. And then I did the same thing with the photo. I just put a really small rectangle behind it. And even though these pencil marks are rather faint, they are a huge help for me when I'm creating the background. So for this layout, I decided I would use some bubble wrap. And I'm using one of the colors from the October collection. This one is a Shimmerz and it's called Celery. And I paint the color onto the bubble wrap and then add some water. And then the water helps me to be able to spread it around the page. And you can see that I'm following those pencil lines. The reason that there's a large area toward the bottom that doesn't have any color on it is because I know that that's where the photo is going to go. I don't have to fill in that whole section. I also added a little bit of color in the upper right-hand corner because I was thinking that's where my title will probably go, so it makes sense to add a little bit of color there. Sometimes I forget about the title cluster and I don't always add mixed media, so this time I remembered. And I just added a little bit, but I think that it ended up adding a nice touch to the layout. I used my heat tool and I dried the background, and I did that so that I could add another layer of color on top, which makes the color a little bit darker and a little bit more intense. The heat tool does tend to make the paper warp a little bit, curl up in some areas. So what I do when that happens is I will run my entire layout before I add the photos and embellishments through my laminator, and that really helps it to flatten out. Sometimes I'll run it through a couple of times, of course, after the paint has dried, and usually before I add any modeling paste or acrylic paint, because those things tend to stick to the sleeve that I run my layout through the laminator with. I bought a Mink quite a few years ago. It's a laminator, and I bought it because Paige Evans suggested in one of her videos that you can run your mixed media backgrounds through them to flatten the backgrounds out. And I decided that that would be a great idea. So I invested in a Mink. I guess you could use any laminator. And I personally have gotten a lot of use out of the laminator. I have been using it ever since I started making mixed media backgrounds. And then you can also buy some laminating film and laminate other things. I'm a teacher, so that comes in handy. So it's definitely not necessary, but I am happy that I have it, and it does really help me with flattening out my layouts. I got the idea to use a laminator to flatten out mixed media backgrounds from a Paige Evans video. She had suggested it. And so since I had started using mixed media in my backgrounds, I decided that it would be a worthwhile investment, and I'm really glad that I purchased it. I purchased two. One died after a while, so I got another one. But I do use it quite frequently for flattening out my backgrounds on a regular basis, I would say. And then I also use it for actually laminating things. I got some laminating film, and it's especially helpful since I'm a teacher. So definitely not something that's necessary, but I have found it to be a worthwhile investment. So sorry for going off on a tangent, but back to the layout. I added lots and lots of splatters. I especially like to add splatters along the edge of where I have my paint applied. I just like the way the splatters look along the edges of the more solid colors. And then I started adding some stamping. I like to use Staz On Ink in jet black, and I used a couple of different stamps that I have in my collection. I used a crackle stamp. I also used a text stamp, that little text stamp that I used that I believe was made by Prima. I also have a rubber stamp off to the left. It has kind of a grid and some dots in it. And then I also used a Tim Holtz stamp. It's a whole bunch of different size dots, and that's become one of my regular stamps to use. So I added those dots all around the background. And I like the way those dots look, but there's nothing like splatters, so I decided to add some splatters too. I'm using some watered down black acrylic paint. To add these splatters, I'm tapping on the base of the straw, and I find that that tends to make splatters slightly larger than if I use, for example, scissors to do the same thing. I'm not really sure why, but I also was able to create some small splatters by doing that. So I put my splattered background aside to dry, and now I'm using some Distress ink in black soot, and I'm inking the edges of all of those triangles that I'm going to use on the page. So now my background is almost done, but I was thinking that one more touch that I could add is to add some modeling paste. And I thought that stars would be a good addition to the background. So I'm using this Crafter's Companion stencil that I had in my stash. I think this might be the first time that I use this particular stencil, and it's called Twinkle, Twinkle. It's from the Enchanted Christmas collection. And I chose this particular stencil because I liked the way the stars were different sizes, and I also liked the way they were somewhat spread out. I didn't want there to be too many stars really close together. I just wanted a little sprinkling of stars across the background. So I used some Master's Touch modeling paste and a metal palette knife, and I added some modeling paste to pretty much the entire area that's green on the background. It's just like everything else, the stamping and the splatters, this just adds a subtle little element to the background. And I think that all of these different touches together makes the background a little bit more interesting. I do really love to add lots of different mediums to the background. So now that the background is completely dry, I'm ready to start adding these triangles. I had taken a picture of how I had arranged them earlier, so it wasn't too hard to remember where I was going to place them on the layout. I do change things around a slight bit, but for the most part, the arrangement remains the same. Later on, I'm going to switch one of those candy corn triangles on the bottom for a bat triangle, and then I moved some other things around. I didn't like the way there were two candy corn triangles right next to each other facing in the same direction. And then I used some ATG adhesive to hold all the triangles in place. One of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that the triangles at the top and at the bottom are an equal distance from the edge of the page. And I also wanted to make sure that you couldn't see any big differences in the distances between the triangles on the rest of the page. So I did a lot of moving things around very, very slightly until I had achieved that. And now I'm ready to attach my photo down. I put a little bit of foam on the left-hand side because the right-hand side is resting on top of the triangles, and if I didn't have something on the left, the photo wouldn't sit straight on the page. I picked out a number of the embellishments from the ephemera pack in the kit that I thought might look nice on the layout. I have that large haunted house with the moon and the bats right on top of my photo. And then I have a tree to the right-hand side of the photo, and there was a cute little bat in there, so I thought that I would include that on top of the tree. And then my title cluster right now consists of the title, which is EEK, and 2 jack-o'-lanterns, and also a spider's web. And I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to put the spider's web. I ended up moving it back to where I had it originally, to the right of the EEK. I think that it looks nice in both places, so I really had a hard time deciding which place I liked it better. And then right away, I was happy with the way that those embellishments looked, so I started attaching them down. I have one of the dots that's included in the kit to the left-hand side of the photo, but I'm going to end up moving that to the title cluster later on. I kept thinking that the bat should go on the right-hand side of the tree, kind of leaning inward so that the eye would go inward, but I just liked it better on the left-hand side of the tree, and I liked the way it looked against the green in the background, so I decided to just leave it where I had it. In the ephemera pack, there were several stars, so I decided to add a couple of them to each of the clusters. I just add one large green one to the cluster that has the tree, and then for the haunted house, I used a purple and an orange star, and then I used the same colors in the title cluster. I just think that it's nice to have some smaller elements mixed in with the larger elements. And then I was noticing that the title didn't stand out as much as some of the other elements that I had on the page, and I really wanted it to. So I thought that I could give it a little bit more attention by matting it with some purple pattern paper. So I did that, and then I inked the edges of the mat. And now I'm rearranging that title cluster. I've added in some leaves. I thought that those leaves were really pretty. Unfortunately, I got a fingerprint on the upper left-hand corner of the title, but I wasn't too worried because I knew there were plenty of embellishments that I could use to cover that area up. At first, I was going to use these leaves that I had already considered using in the cluster. So I attached the more brightly colored orange one up there. And then I realized that there were some candy corn pieces in the ephemera pack, and I wanted to include a piece of candy corn in the layout. So I decided that I would use that to cover up that corner, and then I could use the other 2 leaves that I had as little embellishments. And then because I moved the title a little bit further down, I was able to dangle this spider from it, and I thought that was perfect since I had that spider web right nearby. I also wanted to have some photo corners, so I just punched out 2 photo corners for right now, and I punched it out of the purple bat paper. I loved that paper. And then I later on decided that I was going to add some more photo corners. So there do end up being 4 photo corners altogether, because this is when I moved the dot up to the title cluster. I wanted there to be a little bit more green up there. I had the background color, but I really wanted an embellishment that was green. So I decided that that embellishment would go better there, and then I could use a photo corner on that corner that had previously been covered up. So now I'm adding a few jewels to the layout. I am adding quite a few very tiny jewels to this die cut of a spider web, and I like the purple. I think that the purple was just the right color to go with the layout, so I added quite a few of them. And then I added some very, very tiny orange jewels to the eyes of the bat and the eyes of the cat. And this layout is now complete, and here are a few close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed working with the October Shimmerz Color Kits. I really love Halloween, and this was right up my alley. In the description box, there's a link to the Shimmerz shop where you could check out all of their amazing scrapbooking papers, embellishments, and lots of beautiful paints. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.